next up, we have a future-focused discussion on Web3 for social architecture and communities, led by Siddharth Sthalekar and Camia Young. Camia is actually also in charge of wellbeing for this conference, so thank you for that, Mahi. After this session will be a break, so if you can hold off on your cups of tea for another half hour, you'll have a chance to do it then without missing any of the action. Welcome to Sid and Camia.
And yeah, hello everyone. I see people are still leaving and joining. There's flux in the participant list, so we let it stabilize for a while. But yeah, welcome to everyone who's joining us here for the Web3 for social architectures and community talk. As many of you, actually, I might allow Camia to introduce herself. I can share a little bit about myself. I'm the founder of a project called Neighborhoods that is building Web3 infrastructure for communities, enabling communities to undertake social coordination in different ways, and interact and engage with each other in ways that are possible with this new technology. My background is originally in economics, and so I look at neighborhoods as an opportunity to create new kinds of economic systems that emerge from social fabric, and interactions that occur not only in monetary currencies with different kinds of we call them reputation currencies or wealth systems within these communities. So that is a little about me. Camilla, I'm pretty sure most people here know you or know of you, but anything you'd like to say about yourself that you think is relevant?
Kia ora, koto, ko Camia Togoingwa. I am originally from Colorado. I've been living in Otatahi, Christchurch since 2011. I moved there to be part of the rebuild. I work with groups of people that want to build collectively owned assets to support thriving communities. That sounds like a mouthful, but that's what I do. I'm working on the Takaka co-housing project, and I'm also working with the EHF Fellowship and Hillary Institute. I'm also well known in Christchurch for the Colette's Corner project, which unfortunately fell over, and the exchange. I love working with groups of people, and there's no group that's the same as another one. I really look forward to this conversation today.
Thank you, Camilla. This session actually came about, you could say, last-ish minute. I reached out to Camilla because Stephen reached out and said, it might be nice to do a conversation around Web3 with communities, given Neighborhoods' background in this subject. And around that time, Camilla and I had caught up for the first time, and I thought it would be super cool to have someone with this emphasis on social architectures riffing with me on Web3 and what could be possible. So yes, this conversation is a bit futuristic, but we're going to try and anchor it in your experiences with enabling community with technology. And we'd love to actually hear where you think technology has fallen short, or where you think it could actually play a positive role in flourishing of communities in the future. So since we're a fairly large group, we wanted to keep it interactive, and so I don't think we'll be able to take too many comments or any comments just with people unmuting. So we thought of using the chat actively for this session, since we only have about 25 minutes left. And we have a few prompts that we could pop into, that we could ask you and request you to respond via the chat with. And that would kind of shape this conversation over the next 25 minutes. And so the first question we thought of was very simple: what brought you here? And Camilla, do you think we ask people to just enter the answers as all at once, or just whenever they feel comfortable?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, give that a little bit of thought, and then what brought you here today? What interests you about this topic?
Yeah, I think that would help us share some thoughts accordingly.
Susie, you came with curiosity. Thank you. I can see some people are typing. Let's give people a minute here.
Yeah. For those who have joined or didn't hear the prompt, the first question we're asking you to answer through the chat is just a simple, what brought you here? Shireen, if I'm saying your name right, I'm not really sure what Web3 means, so curious to learn more. That is a very good question. And I'm pretty sure there's quite a few people here with similar questions. I'm glad you asked that. I have no idea what Web3 means. That is something we can try and answer.
You want to answer that while we're waiting for these other questions to roll
Sure,
in?
yeah, that might be a good question. Well, Web3 is one of those terms that has just emerged through chaotic discussions on the internet. So unfortunately, there's no council that has defined Web3 for us. I wish the world were that simple, but you could say this current paradigm, a dominant paradigm of tech that we experience today, the Google, Facebook universes are known as Web 2, which are largely data-centric models where we're interacting with through applications, and most of our data and information is stored on large data warehouses, and these fairly largish companies are custodians of this data for us. Web3 flips that on its head a little bit and creates a model where you have agency over your information and your interactions on the internet. And so you could say it's creating an agentic relationship with technology, and provides a portal into new ways of organizing ourselves. So maybe we don't have to organize ourselves as users of an app, like maybe we could be members of a community. And that's potentially what Web3 is opening to us. Social architecture triggered my curiosity. Camia, do you want to answer Rob's?
Yeah, I mean, the way that I use that term is to mean that there's usually an infrastructure that supports a community to operate, and that is different in every community, but there are some kind of, let's say, parallels that occur. It usually comes down to understanding the purpose of that community and that being clear enough for people to join. It usually comes down to having some form of kind of a communication culture. And how are we going to share information and share conversation together? And it could be even more extensive, coming into extensive legal documents about how we're going to make decisions together, or is it going to be consensus making or otherwise? So when I think of the social architecture, it's how we actually, what is the invisible structures that bring a community together, but then define how it operates. Yeah. I see Chris Jensen has got a great question for particularly this one. He's got the Leadership Lab, which has an extensive community and been working with many communities, and is curious about how Web3 could usefully augment those networks. Yeah, that might actually bring us into our next question quite nicely. What do you think, Sid?
Yeah, that's a good segue. So our next question, and I'm sorry, we're not going to be able to read all, but we're not going to be able to read out all your comments aloud, but we're definitely reading them to get a sense of how people want to shape this conversation. The next prompt was, what has been your experience in enabling communities with tech? So I'm guessing most of you might have been part of communities or try to build communities, and you might have used technology to enable it. And what has been your experience in enabling communities? Was it delightful? Was it not so delightful? Interesting people. Sasha from Money Sweet Spot. Hello, Sasha. She runs an interesting new approach towards lending in communities in and around New Zealand. So I'm really excited. We've had some interesting conversation. I'm glad to see you here. I would like to empower people to form their own intentional communities and to support councils to work more collaboratively with local communities in creation of those housing communities of impact.
there's some doubt whether technology is useful or not, and or if it's clunky and becomes distracting. Certainly experienced that some people are quick to pick up new technology and others have a real struggle with it, so it becomes quite divisive. Yeah.
Real quick, I'll pick up Malcolm's question. I think it's an interesting one. What does it mean for me to have agency in any example? And I think the word agency is used in pretty much the way you would imagine, where I would frame it more as it's not a passive relationship with your information and your interactions online. So you actually have power over your footprint as you are interacting with technology. And so in our current mode, like let's say I send Camia a WhatsApp message, I don't have agency over that message because Facebook could technically delete that message, could technically choose to show that message to whoever they choose, could technically decide what to do with it. But agent-centric technology means it actually flips that on its head. So it actually is an architecture which gives me primary control over this information. And of course, with that agency, I can choose to delete it, share it, port it, take it maybe from WhatsApp to another app or maybe to another community. And so it's not just, I would like to emphasize, it's not in the libertarian sense, like, oh, it's my information, I can do what I choose to do with it. It's also ultimately information. So it's between, like the agency lies between the two members who exchange it. So if I message Camia, she also now has agency over what she chooses to do with that information. And of course, we can develop some kind of agreements around what we do with messages that we share with each other. Like maybe we agree to not post it on the internet, and that's an agreement we have. But that's how I would define agency in this Web3 way. But yeah, we could get back to the comments.
Yeah, there's quite a few comments saying that technology hasn't quite lived up to the hopes, maybe. And it brings to mind something that I heard many years ago in a lecture that talks about how technology and or any innovation moves through time. And they use the example of the car. And, first there was the horses, and then there was the horse-drawn carriages, and then there's, the bicycles, and then there was the initial cars. But each one of them somehow moves through time and disappears. And so our self-driving cars may at some point move into the past, and non-self-driving cars, automatic driving cars, mechanical, I don't know, AI driving cars may move into our future. So there's this idea that technology is forever evolving. And I find with the technology that we have, that was a kind of a clumsy example, but I hope you understand what I mean. I feel like with the technology that we have to support communities to thrive, we're still in this kind of nascent development phase, and we're still trying to figure out how to make it work well for us. But it looks like just on the near horizon, we're about to step over into what will be a highly technologically underpinned means of communication for communities. So I think of it like looking out to the horizon right now, and we're going through that early learning curve part.
Mm. Thank you.
Just catching up on some of the comments. Has anybody got a good example of how technology has really served your community well?
In the past? Well, I could add
Right.
this conference, right, is an example of
Yeah.
specific community, even though loosely held, coming together and connecting, having conversations in a way that would just have been impossible 15 years ago or 10 years ago. So
yeah, great example. I also think of WhatsApp groups. I don't know how many WhatsApp groups you're in right now, but I'm probably in, I don't know, dozens, some of which I pay attention to and not, but it's just a really informal and super easy way to keep in touch with a group of people. And it's really brought So it's a little bit like hanging out in the kitchen and grabbing my water at the co-working space. I end up hearing and knowing a lot more than I would have otherwise. So that's been a really good advantage for me.
Good and bad stuff.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just your uncle telling you untrue things, but that's fine.
Thank you, Erica. Yeah, social architecture is more of a holistic approach, but it needs to happen with a foundation of trust and understanding about community commitment. Yeah, completely agree with that. Thank you, Erica.
I feel
Yes,
like we could pin that
so much
message.
of it is about the connection between people, isn't it?
Should we?
Want to bounce to the next question?
Yes. And this, I feel like this is a very Camia question. So I actually think, Camia, you could riff on this after people share a few reflections. Our third question is, what does community need to flourish, according to you? What does community need to flourish?
Give yourselves a minute for that one. Phone or face-to-face conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Chris wrote that a little bit earlier too. That really is kind of unbelievably critical. We really noticed that during the pandemic. Connection, purpose, hope, and the tools to make this happen. Yeah. Deep dives into authentic conversation. Thank you, Zola. Activation of both hearts and minds and hands. So action. Yeah, I hear that. Yeah, while you guys are going, I was asked to prepare for this a little bit. And so one thing that I think of when I think of communities that are thriving, there's no one recipe. This isn't like you can open up a guidebook and go, this is how we make a thriving community, although a lot of people would really value a guidebook of that nature. Because no two communities are the same, really. You really need to take a unique approach to each one. What's really at the core of a thriving community are the people that make up the community, you know, hey tangata, hey tangata, hey tangata, critical. And I think when I work with communities, and this isn't necessarily the definition of communities for everyone, but it's a group of people with a common purpose. And so a thriving community really needs to define what that common purpose is, because then people can either step towards it, or when it's no longer valid for them, they can also step away from it. I've found in my experience, a thriving community also really needs a lead. It's much harder, and I see that there's a lot of interest in the DAO, the decentralized organizations. I would love to see those work. I've participated in a number of them, and I haven't quite been in one that's thriving yet. That also might be because we're not quite ready for that in our, let's say, social evolution. But the communities that I've seen that really thrive often thrive because they have a good lead and a strong lead. That lead can change, but that there is some sort of person that's actually holding the center. I think communities need to have people that come and go. So it's not like you're trapped in and you're not there forever, but you can easily step in and step out. You need to know why you're stepping in and stepping out. And that's linked to this notion of having a mutual exchange or some form of reciprocity. Like, what am I getting out of it and what am I giving? Did you follow any of the other comments coming up here? Was there anything else?
I have been. There's some interesting ones, but I might just ask you to share a bit more. Like, I think you've said some interesting things in the past around the role of culture in a community and what you think of as culture. Like, is it, I think there's a tendency to think of a community as a deeply serious group of people that are saving the world, but what is the spectrum there? Could it also just be playful and light and connection in different ways?
Yeah, I mean, a community could be a group of people that like to collect Mickey Mouse pens. That just popped into my mind. I don't have any Mickey Mouse pens. But you know, I was just in Japan, and it's amazing how many fetishes there are there. And you know, every fetish has a community, it seems. So it's quite remarkable to see that communities can form over what I would call very serious and rigorous conversations, and also very light and playful ones. And having fun in our lives is as critical as taking on the big challenges that we face in our lives. So yeah, when culture comes up, I think that culture often is informed by not only the people that are there and the norms of that particular society or area. In other words, how do we communicate with each other? But also, you know, what's the mechanism by which we're going to respect each other? You know, how do you build the care, respect, and understanding into the way that the community flows somehow? That would be my thoughts on the culture. I know that this is a kind of a core to the design of the work that you do with your infrastructure for communities. Do you want to add to that?
Yes, I could add to that, but I think there's an interesting comment, and maybe Chris, if you feel comfortable unmuting yourself. You said you've been surprised that online communities have been more connecting than you might have thought, especially to address isolation. I feel like that might be something worth elaborating on from your experience.
Could have said in Camia. Yeah, I think, you know, it's a common preference for kanohi kiti kanohi face to face, but and I have that as well. But if you factor in isolation, either like physically you just can't get to face, or isolation in your own house just because you're lonely or don't have relationships, you know, and all of us face that at times, then it's actually quite powerful. Tech can be very, very powerful in a surprising way.
Yeah, and I would like to say at this point, every time I do talk about technology intersecting with communities and culture, it can be quite polarizing. Like, I think it tends to bring up these thoughts of, well, who wants to live in this world, Sid, where everyone's just like locked up in their caves and interacting with each other through chat messages? And I don't think I necessarily imagine that at all. I think what we're all proposing here is an an enabling of community in a way in which offline communities or in real life or physically co-located communities can leverage distributed technology in new ways to facilitate what they do without being necessarily under the whims of overarching technologies. Or it could also enable or foster more in real life interactions with communities that are geographically um, located across the world. I mean, the EHF community is an example. Like when I joined the fellowship, COVID had just hit, but we as a community could still connect and engage with each other through Zoom rooms just like these. And just last night we had a beautiful dinner together here in Christchurch, and it just had me thinking about how those online communities actually translated into offline interactions like last night. Um, and I think what's important to acknowledge there is enabling models that aren't extracting or distorting community models. Because in the way I see it, I think we have WhatsApp groups, we have Facebook groups, but often they are fueled or distorted by an underlying business model that need not have the best interests of the community at heart. Like I think most of us would agree, um, you know, Facebook, for example, isn't necessarily in the business of facilitating our relationships. And so when we delink the two and we say, here's infrastructure for communities, communities can establish their own models on how to exchange, interact with each other. Maybe most of this can be open source, free of cost, or done in an extremely easy way in which it's really simple for communities to put together gathering spaces. I think it allows us to create interactions that aren't fueled by like me being glued to my phone. Like it actually is not, there's no underlying capitalistic model selling things to my eyeballs, right? And so I think that's a possibility we see and that we think is something worth exploring.
Can I
please.
jump in on this one? There's a lot of people that are really interested to hear more about your platform and how you're actually solving that problem. Do you want to maybe share a little bit in the last 3 minutes that we have here?
Oh, is it time already? Sure. Well, neighborhoods is at the core, like this, the core of our offering is an open source module called the Social Sense Maker, which effectively allows communities to articulate what is important to them. And so these might be, hours contributed in the local community garden. It might be blogs published. It might be ways in which we assess each other's contributions and use those simple social building blocks and output it into some way in which we coordinate with each other, like some kind of social algorithm that allows us to govern ourselves. So Web3 and projects like Neighborhoods allow communities to say, our rules, our cultural norms are now scribed into these peer-to-peer ledgers, which doesn't require a large tech empire to coordinate us, or doesn't require something like a nation state to pass laws. It's actually done in a peer-to-peer way, and within these underlying cultural norms, we can plug in whatever little tools we need to interact with each other. So you could imagine Camia's neighborhood, where we gather and might like to chat with each other, might like to meet and volunteer in our local community garden, might like to share articles with each other. And we get to choose what our cultural norms are. And of course, because it's Web3, each individual has agency over their information, can choose to port this social capital across neighborhoods. So you could choose to hop from Camia's to Chris's neighborhood, and Chris might say, oh, if you volunteered in Camia's neighborhood, you immediately, unlock certain accelerated levels of engagement in mine. And so it creates these distributed webs of social intelligence. And so I would say it's a more peer-to-peer, ground-up approach towards coordination, as opposed to something that's, more top-down. And I think
we're about 1 minute actually, or 30 seconds. So this conversation's awesome, and it looks like we have a lot more legs in it. If anybody wants to get in touch with Sid or I, we're both on LinkedIn, and you're certainly welcome to find us. We can pop our LinkedIn profiles or our emails into the chat. And if anybody has any further questions or thoughts, feel free to jump in and contact us.
Cool, thank you very much, Siddharth and Camia. It is now break time, so everyone can take 15 minutes to do whatever you like with that time. People have been really good at asking questions in the chat, having a little bit of discussion. It's been really awesome to see. If you want, this right now is your opportunity to actually just unmute yourself, have a talk with the other people in the room, if that's what you'd like to do. Remember as well, if you're interested in just talking with people, that there's the Kahikatea room where there are community activities and discussions happening all day. So you're welcome to jump in there anytime you like. And you can also share about your experiences with the conference on LinkedIn. Just tag the conferences in your posts and start a conversation. I'll see you all back here at 11 o'clock. Cheers.